We offered them a fence. Instead of a song, the galaxy expected a grand performance of diplomatic theater, complete with flowery speeches and the traditional, soul-crushing exchange of hollow promises. Instead, the humans walked into the chamber, set a heavy, industrial-grade steel barrier in the middle of the diplomatic floor, and told the Council that their era of beautiful lies had officially come to an end. For centuries, our interstellar council had operated on a diet of curated pleasantries. We relied on the song of diplomacy, the art of saying nothing while sounding profound, and the practice of keeping our borders soft and our intentions veiled. It was a system built on leashes, where every species was tethered to the council by the promise of protection or the threat of exclusion. It kept the peace, or so we told ourselves, by ensuring that no one ever really knew where they stood. Then, the humans arrived. They were not like us. They did not come from a lineage of empires that survived by weaving tapestries of deceit. They were a species born from the friction of hard geography and unforgiving climates. They did not value the song, they valued the fence. I was the presiding archivist for the council when the human delegation arrived. I expected their lead diplomat, a man named Miller, to present a treaty of unity or a trade agreement draped in the usual flowery language of universal cooperation. I watched from the high gallery as Miller strode to the center of the hall. He did not bow. He did not offer the traditional opening greeting that signifies mutual subservience. He signaled to his team. They brought in a modular, reinforced perimeter fence, a jagged, utilitarian structure of black alloy that looked completely out of place against the shimmering gold and silk of our chambers. They bolted it to the marble floor with loud, mechanical precision. The sound of the drills echoed through the hall, a harsh, rhythmic intrusion that made every representative in the room recoil. Miller looked at the gathered delegates. His face was not fixed in the standard diplomatic smile. It was neutral. It was expectant. It was the face of a man who was not there to be liked. He explained that the era of the Leash was over. He stated that the human fleet would no longer participate in the collective security pacts that kept our borders porous and our governance dependent on council oversight. He told us that they were establishing a fence. It was not a metaphor. It was a literal, hard-language boundary. They had mapped their space, they had defined their resources, and they had committed to a policy of real sovereignty. No more joint patrols, no more shared intelligence, no more open-door policies based on the thin, fragile promise of mutual trust. If a species wanted to trade, they would do it at the gate. If they wanted to talk, they would do it with a record of the conversation. And if they crossed the line without permission, the fence would not negotiate. The council erupted. It was a violation of every norm. It was an insult to the history of the interstellar community. We were built on the idea that we were all part of one big, happy, orchestrated song, and here was a species essentially telling us to stay on our own side of the grass. Miller didn't shout. He didn't argue. He waited for the noise to subside, his gaze fixed on the council floor. He told us that we were confusing friendliness with function. He said that a smile in a diplomatic setting was usually just a way to hide the teeth, and that humans had learned a long time ago that you do not trust a smile when your borders are at stake. He said that a fence is the most honest thing two neighbors can build. It tells you exactly where you stand. It removes the ambiguity that leads to war. It creates a space where you can be yourself, and the other person can be themselves, without the constant, draining pressure of pretending to be something else. I sat in my booth, scribbling frantically on my datapad. I realized then that my entire profession, the art of diplomacy, the crafting of nuanced messages, the dance of the subtle negotiation, was an architecture of sand. I had been building castles of words, while the humans had been building walls of concrete. The Treaty of Real Sovereignty was signed within the week. It was the shortest treaty in our records. It consisted of 12 pages of simple, plain language constraints. It did not speak of harmony. It did not mention the song. It outlined protocols, penalties, and hard, immovable boundaries. The immediate result was a cooling of relations that felt like a death knell to our established culture. We had no more late-night galas, no more secret back-channel deals, and no more of the comfortable, dishonest ambiguity that had kept our council afloat for generations. But then, something strange happened. The small skirmishes that had plagued our border worlds for centuries simply stopped. There was no more confusion about jurisdiction. There was no more debate about who owned which asteroid. There was no more posturing. If a ship entered human space, it knew exactly what the consequences were. There was no room for misinterpretation. The fence was clear. The rules were plain. The ambiguity had been stripped away, and with it, the paranoia that fueled our endless, low-level conflict. We had spent so long trying to sing a song of unity that we had forgotten to ensure we were speaking the same language. The humans had not offered us a song. They had offered us the stability of knowing exactly where we stood. I reflect on that day often, sitting in the quiet of my archives. I see the humans in the distance, working their own land, maintaining their own fence, and living their own lives. They do not visit the council anymore. They do not attend our galas. Some call it isolationism, some call it arrogance. But I call it clarity. They taught us that you cannot be truly sovereign if you are constantly looking for the approval of your neighbor. You cannot build a future if you are constantly negotiating the past. You cannot trust a smile that is required by protocol, but you can trust a boundary that is defined by law. This is the great, uncomfortable truth of the galaxy. We have spent our entire history trying to make everyone like us. We have tried to blend our cultures, our currencies, and our ideologies into one big, indistinguishable mess. And in the process, we have lost the ability to be clear about who we are. If you are currently living a life where you are constantly apologizing for your boundaries, if you are letting others dictate your terms because you are afraid of appearing unfriendly, you are living inside a song that was written by someone else. You are living on a leash. Stop asking for permission to define your own space. Stop apologizing for the fence you need to build around your own peace of mind. Clarity is not an act of aggression. It is an act of respect. When you tell someone exactly where your limits are, you are giving them the greatest gift possible. You are removing the risk of their failure. You are telling them how to treat you so that your relationship can actually succeed. Don't be afraid to set a boundary. Don't be afraid to leave the song behind. Build your fence. Tend your own land. And let your life speak for itself. The galaxy is a loud and chaotic place, filled with people who want you to dance to their rhythm. Choose your own rhythm. Keep your own counsel. And remember that the most beautiful, honest thing you can ever build is a clear, simple line that says, "This is where I end, and this is where you begin." Go build your boundary. Stand behind it with pride. And keep your own peace. Because the world will respect the person who knows exactly what they are willing to defend. Take a deep breath. Hold your ground. And start building. The silence that followed the human departure was not the heavy, oppressive quiet of a dead empire, but the crisp, bracing stillness of a morning after a storm. For decades, the Council had operated on a frequency of nervous, high-pitched chatter, a relentless hum of committees, subcommittees, and consensus building that had disguised the rot of our collective stagnation. With the humans gone, that hum vanished. We were finally alone with the structure they had left behind. I walked the perimeter of the human delegation's abandoned zone in the diplomatic quarter. The steel fence they had bolted to the marble floor remained, a stark, jagged scar against the ornate architecture of our ancient hall. It was ugly, it was aggressive. And yet, I found myself touching the cold, industrial surface of the alloy, feeling a strange sense of comfort in its immovable density. It was an honest object. It did not pretend to be art. It did not try to convince me of its virtue. It was simply, undeniably there. The weeks that followed were a testament to the chaos that ensues when a species accustomed to the leash is suddenly given the freedom of a tetherless existence. The council devolved into a series of frantic, directionless debates. Without the human delegation to act as the primary antagonist or the primary stabilizer, the member species began to tear at one another over trivialities. Without the song of diplomacy, we were discovering that we didn't actually have much to say to each other. I spent my time in the archives, pulling files from the eras before the council, searching for the moment we had traded our identity for the illusion of belonging. I found it in the records of the First Contact Wars, a series of treaties signed in fear, mediated by entities that had long since vanished. We had agreed to be part of the collective because we were terrified of the dark. We had traded our sovereignty for a place in a choir. We had forgotten how to stand in the dark without holding someone else's hand. A delegation of the Krell, a species that had always been the most ardent supporter of the old council's harmony mandates, came to me in the archives. They were worried. They wanted to know if I could find a way to draft a new pact, something that would bring the humans back to the table, something that would restore the old song. They were shaking, their bioluminescent scales dimming in the shadows of the library. I looked at them, and for the first time, I didn't see allies. I saw terrified children who had lost their favorite toy. I told them that the humans weren't coming back because there was nothing left to negotiate. The fence had already been built. The terms had already been set. The only thing left to do was to decide whether we would continue to try to sing to a wall, or whether we would finally start building our own foundations. They were horrified. They left in silence, their scales flashing a pale, sickly gray. I realized then that the humans had done us a favor far greater than any peace treaty. By setting their boundary, they had forced us to define our own. They had stripped us of the ability to hide behind the collective. They had forced every species in the council to look in the mirror and ask the one question we had spent centuries avoiding. What are we when we are not part of the whole? I began to draft a new set of protocols, not for the council, but for my own people. I focused on the things that mattered: resource management, territorial integrity, and the development of local culture. I stopped looking to the council for guidance and started looking to our own history. I stopped trying to appeal to the Krell or the others and started focusing on the needs of the populations in our sector. It was hard, it was lonely, and it was the first time in 1,000 years that I felt like a representative of a sovereign people rather than a functionary in a gilded machine. The galaxy is a place of profound complexity, and it will always tempt you with the promise of easy belonging. It will offer you the song. It will offer you the leash. It will offer you the comfort of a life where you never have to stand alone. But if you accept the song, you lose the ability to write your own melody. If you accept the leash, you lose the ability to walk your own path. The humans knew this, and they were willing to be hated for it. They were willing to walk away from the table, to bolt their steel to our marble, and to be the villains of our narrative if it meant that they could remain the authors of their own. If you are standing at the threshold of a decision that requires you to choose between the comfort of the crowd and the clarity of your own purpose, choose the clarity. It will be cold at first, the silence will be deafening, you will miss the song. But you will also discover the strength that exists only in the spaces where you are finally, truly alone. You are not defined by your membership in a collective. You are defined by the limits you set, the work you do, and the boundaries you defend. The fence is not an act of hostility, it is an act of creation. It is the line you draw between the person you are and the person you are told to be. Stand tall. Look at your own hold. Find the place where the old, hollow lies are bolted to your floor. Get your tools and start unbolting them. The council is fading. The song is ending. The silence is your opportunity. Take a deep breath. Step over the line and start building your own world. It is waiting for you. Do not hesitate. The day the unbolting finally began remains etched in the collective memory of our sector, though not as a moment of destruction. It is remembered as the moment the floor was cleared. I was there, in the Grand Rotunda, when the last of the Krell representatives finally let go of the old protocols and allowed the heavy, rusted machinery of the Council to be dismantled. The silence was no longer frightening, it was pregnant with possibility. We were no longer waiting for a conductor to tell us when to speak. We were finally listening to the sound of our own voices, and for the first time, they did not harmonize. They argued, they disagreed, they negotiated. They lived. The humans had been right all along. A harmony that requires the suppression of individual identity is not a peace, it is a funeral. I transitioned from archivist to a role that had no name in our old language. I became a negotiator of boundaries. My office was not a hall of gold, but a simple, open room at the edge of our territory, situated exactly where the Krell lands met the border of our own. There were no silk tapestries, no subtle shifts of light, and no hidden agendas. There was only a table, a ledger, and the physical reality of the border between us. When the Krell came to me, they no longer brought gifts of hollow praise. They brought maps. They brought data on water usage, trade quotas, and security protocols. They did not ask for a song, they asked for a contract. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was honest. It was granular. It was a recognition that we were two separate, distinct entities trying to exist in the same universe without encroaching upon the space that defined the other's reality. We spent 3 days hammering out the details of a mineral mining rights agreement. There were moments of genuine anger. There were moments where we nearly walked away from the table. But every moment was grounded in the truth of our own interests, not the fabrication of a collective need. When the document was signed, there was no celebration. We simply shook hands, an action that had felt alien to us for centuries, and went back to our own work. The fence, in the metaphorical sense, was finally secure. We knew where we stood. And because we knew where we stood, we could finally stop fighting over the ground we shared. The humans, in their distant, impenetrable sector, never returned to acknowledge our progress. They did not send a commendation. They did not offer an alliance. They simply stayed behind their own fence, living their own lives, a testament to the idea that true independence is not won through acknowledgement, but through the quiet, stubborn maintenance of one's own reality. I have come to realize that the humans didn't build that barrier to keep us out. They built it to keep themselves in, to keep themselves from being eroded by the endless, exhausting demand of the collective. They understood that if you do not define yourself, the world will define you, and the world's definition will always be the one that is most convenient for someone else. The galaxy has not become a utopia. It is still a harsh, sprawling, and indifferent place. Conflicts still arise. Disagreements still occur, but they are no longer the existential crises of a dying empire. They are the manageable, routine challenges of sovereign neighbors who know how to talk to each other across a table, rather than screaming at each other from across a void. I am an old archivist now, and my eyes struggle to read the fine print of the ledgers. But I still spend my mornings walking the perimeter of our sector, checking the integrity of our markers. I see the young ones, the ones who never knew the song, working the fields and managing the senses with a level of focused, quiet competence that would have been impossible in the old days. They do not look to the stars for approval. They look to their own hands and to the ground they stand upon. If you find yourself lost in the noise of your own world, if you find yourself feeling the pressure to conform, to harmonize, or to sacrifice your boundaries for the sake of an empty piece, remember the day the steel was bolted to the floor. Remember that clarity is not a crime. Remember that the most radical thing you can do is to define your own existence, regardless of what the collective demands of you. Do not be afraid of the distance between you and the world. That distance is where you live. That distance is where you build. And that distance is where you finally become the person you were always intended to be. The council hall is empty now. It is a monument to a time when we thought we needed someone else to tell us who we were. Do not look back at the rotunda. Do not pine for the song. Turn your back on the hollow, gilded hall and walk toward the horizon. Your life is your own. Your boundaries are your strength. The fence is standing, and the land on the other side is yours to build. Take a final breath of this new, clear air. Put your shoulder to the work, and start creating the reality you want to inhabit. You are no longer a part of the choir. You are the author of the story. Write it clearly. Write it honestly. And never, ever let them take the pen from your hand. The work is yours. Begin. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.